Hello, and welcome to the Vicars Watch Dibley,
the podcast where real priests talk about pop culture and what we learned about faith, life and the church. We've watched Dibley, now we're watching everything else. I'm Cate.
I'm Ross.
And I'm Ruthie, and today we are talking about Call the Midwife. We are talking about an episode that's fairly early on in the whole series of Call the Midwife, and we discuss some quite serious topics about calling and changing of calling, but also trauma and the difficulties that might happen within communities. So with these difficult topics, there'll be time codes in the description to avoid certain topics if that is something that you would need to do. But otherwise, join us as we talk about the wonderful series that is Call the Midwife.
We're in our vicarages, you're listening in, we're ready and raring to talk about Call the Midwife. But first, Father Ross is going to give us some notices. Is that so, brother? Sorry, I've enjoyed Call the Midwife so much, I can't stop talking in my voice.
You've gone straight into character.
I do exactly the same thing once after like a Jane Austen adaptation and I start speaking like I'm Mr. Darcy.
You are.
Hello, yes. Well, it's just a nice little thing that we're recording, and it is the 7th anniversary of the day that I was ordained to the priesthood. And I kind of forgot until my friends celebrated it on our little WhatsApp chat, and I was sat in my stall at the cathedral, so I took a selfie. But yeah, it's been I've spent a little bit of reflective time before recording, just thinking, okay, what's it been like? What's 7 years a priest like? And first anniversary as a cathedral priest, and yeah, fascinating. So anyway, it's nice to spend my anniversary with you.
That's exciting.
I should have popped the Prosecco. And,
woo! Yeah, should have done that. Yeah, I had a very different revelation that I told you about pre-recording, and you've immediately smacked me back and told me it's rubbish. It's rubbish. And I last night had the revelation that if I was a biscuit, I would be a pink wafer, and you two have immediately told me that I am not a pink wafer.
Yeah, no, you're not a pink wafer. Well, explain your reasoning first, and then it makes it exceptionally clear why we smacked you down.
Well, a pink wafer is a nice biscuit. I personally enjoy a pink wafer, and isn't a nostalgic one, but it's kind of frivolous and not much use sometimes, but it's fun to be around, and maybe that's how I'm feeling as a pink wafer right now.
No.
Utter nonsense.
Oh,
it's nonsense. You have far more substance than a pink wafer.
Thanks, guys.
If you have to talk about frivolity, then you are a party ring, because you have substance enough, but covered in fun to trick a child into having something that might just actually fill their stomach in a way that a pink wafer just melts away into nothing. They're lovely,
That's true.
But they are ephemeral. But a party ring is going to fill a stomach.
Also, I don't like pink wafers, but I do like you. So I would also, alongside the party ring, I might just throw in a ginger cream, because I do like a ginger cream, lots of substance, and a really nice soft centre.
That's because I had a baby and now I have a soft centre.
Or a jammy dodger because you are fun and full of heart.
Oh, thanks, guys. Cute. I'm feeling affirmed now. I mean, a ginger nut would have been my kind of probably a bit cliche and classic. So having a ginger crunch cream makes me feel a bit fancier. What about you two? What if you were biscuits? What would you be?
Oh, gosh.
And now I've thrown you.
Yeah.
What biscuits do you think we would be?
Get in the comments, listeners. I quite like, this isn't necessarily what I am, but I quite like a dark chocolate digestive.
Yeah. There needs to be a cheeky side to you as a biscuit. I wonder if you're a jammy dodger.
Okay.
Yeah, just a bit cheeky and a bit fun.
Maybe one of those jammy dodgers that has, like, don't you get jammy dodgers that not only have the jam, but also have a cream inside as well?
Oh, yeah. Like, we're not an off-brand, we're talking a fancy jammy dodger here.
Sure.
Or you're a Bakewell tart, which technically isn't a biscuit.
Hey, I'll take a Bakewell tart.
What about Cate?
I mean, if we're going to be mean, we could say shortbread. But I don't want to be mean.
Poor Cate. I don't know why.
Oh, I know! You're those animal biscuits with the chocolate.
The Cadbury Zoo, whatever.
Yes,
that's what you are. Those.
Yeah, because you dip in them; they're great fun, and you're surprised by things that come out, and like you'll have all these interesting facts. And I'm pretty sure those biscuits have facts on them too. So there you go.
Thank you. So
what a weird start.
Yeah, weird start for that.
Help us out, listeners. Please get in the comments and tell us which biscuits are we?
Yeah. I mean, this sort of frivolity is part and parcel with what we've watched today, really. And I think maybe that's why we've talked about it, because we're in that particular mood after watching it. We've just been watching an episode of Call the Midwife.
Yeah.
Which, Ruthie, you've brought to us to talk about.
Yeah, I have. And I feel like I need to set a proviso to begin with. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but I'm using it. That I am fairly new to the Call the Midwife train. Okay, so I have not seen all the seasons of Call the Midwife. I am aware of Call the Midwife. It was one of those things that kind of came up on my Facebook feed quite a lot, of clips of it, and I was like, I just need to watch this. I need to get into this. So I haven't seen all the seasons. I haven't seen all the series, and I've started at the very beginning, and I'm watching all the way through. So I don't know all about it, but the basic premise of it is a show that's a drama, but there's comedic elements of it definitely as well. And it's on the BBC, and it's set in the 1950s, initially, in the East End of London. And it's this story about this team of midwives who are connected to a place called Nonata's House, which is where an order of nuns live. And the nuns are also involved in medical care and midwifery. And so you get some characters who aren't nuns, but you get a lot of characters who are nuns as well. And it's the stories of these ordinary people in the East End. Lots of them are birth stories because they're all midwives, but you get to know these different characters, and there's lots of different aspects of faith about it as well. And it's just heartwarming and heart-wrenching at the same time.
Yeah, and if for context, if you haven't seen Call the Midwife, if you wonder why I started the episode talking like this, it's because they all speak in these jolly public school 1950s British accents, don't they? They
do. Particularly a character that we'll focus quite a lot on today, who's called Chummy, who comes from a very posh upbringing, who is Miranda Hart and a babe.
Miranda Hart,
yeah. She's wonderful. I can't even actually remember her real name in it. They just all know her as Chummy. Camilla, yeah.
Camilla something,
but she's Chummy. And yeah, you follow these stories of it's mainly all single women. They do, some of them pair up later on as a part of the series. But it's this story that we go through. Before we go on to which specific episode we watched, what's been your experience of watching Call the Midwife? Have you watched it before? Do you know much about it?
I've not watched it religiously, so to speak. I think I may have seen some of the earliest episodes when it first came out. But yeah, I didn't stick with it. And one thing that I do remember was a comic relief sketch where they have some of the characters turn up, but also so does Doctor Who and various other people from the modern hospital reality show. Anyway, I can't remember what that's called, but yeah, 24
and it's
hours
got
in
Chummy
A&E
in there, isn't it?
And Chummy's in there, but she also then does the Miranda Hart thing from Miranda, where she looks at the camera and makes a naughty joke.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What about you, Kate?
Pretty much in the same boat as Ross. I've kind of seen bits of it, and yeah, I think I've seen some comic relief sketches, and I knew Miranda was in it, but beyond that, haven't really watched much of it.
It was kind of her first step out of comedy and into something slightly more serious.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to see. I mean, she continues to bring that light-hearted element, which she does to other roles, like in the adaptation of Emma that came out a few years ago.
Yeah.
She's a very good actress as well as a comedian.
Yeah.
Miranda is one of at least I know for myself, Ruthie and Jenny as well during college, Miranda was a big
friends of vegetables.
Our shared identity.
Well, I mean, she is a good. She became that example of single adult womanhood, and
and public about being a Christian as well.
Yeah, yeah.
We should do an episode on Miranda.
Yes, we should. Absolutely, there's plenty of Vicars in that. And I think what's really interesting about Call the Midwife is that Faith is just through the whole of it, because it's with an order of nuns. There's all these sisters, and they talk about faith a lot, and you see their kind of evening prayer, and there's lots of kind of ethical questions that happen as part of it because of it. And one of the storylines that it will be coming up and has been touched on is things like abortion and that coming into official medical world for non-emergency reasons and backstreet abortions and all this kind of stuff, and the ethical dilemma that these people are going through as part of it, and the effects that knock on to the East End, because it's not a rich community, it's a very poverty-stricken community, a lot of it. And so you see these women giving birth in all these really difficult situations and all the things that happen. And it's one of the my lovely godmother, Auntie Lisa, she used to love watching Call the Midwife, but would cry at every single episode. And it's just one of those, because it's so emotional, and you mainly follow, one burst story per episode or two, but you get so invested in these characters so quickly.
And isn't it also semi-biographical?
Yeah, it's based on a book.
It's based on the memoirs of Jennifer Worth, who's, I think, the primary character for the first few seasons.
Yeah, so there's a what's it called? Narration that's done over the top of lots of these stories, kind of at the beginning and parts of it, and at the end that'll sum up. That's like the author speaking, and it's writing down her memoirs as part of it, and you do see her for some of the later episodes. So we watched one that was series 2, episode 8, and just for a bit of context, very early days. I think they're on to series 15 will be coming out in 2026, according to IMDb. So we are quite far behind with all of this. But I chose this one mainly because I haven't seen all of them. There might be a different, better episode to talk about some of these things. But pretty much every episode has got some big things to talk about. And in this particular episode, there is a character called Sister Bernadette, who is later on known as
Shelagh.
Shelagh. The name just disappeared from my head. Shelagh, And she is wrestling. She has been a nun. She's been a nun for a long, long time. She trained to be a midwife and a nurse and then joined the order after that. And she's been wrestling with her identity and knowing what she's supposed to do next. She thinks maybe she's not called to be a nun anymore. So I want to touch on that. But it's also an episode where Chummy, who we've already talked about, she's married a policeman and she's pregnant, and it's the episode where she gives birth and she has a very difficult birth, and that affects everyone. And so I kind of wanted to touch on those two things. And again, listeners who know it well, forgive my ignorance, because I'm going to talk about things that may happen later on that I don't know about yet, and so are not fully in context, but we'll stick in this episode and see what it is. So let's start with Sister Bernadette. So Sister Bernadette is a midwife, and you find out earlier on in the series, she is a nun, but she started developing feelings for the doctor. The doctor is a key part of the community, who knows a lot of the midwives, who's involved in lots of the births and things like that. And she recognises that there's something there. And she gets really, really ill. She has this horrible illness, and it's not looking good for her. And it's at this point that she's questioning what her purpose in life is, and how what she thought her calling was, to be a nun for her entire life, may possibly change. So that's a long introduction to the question of, do callings change? Or once we're called to do something and felt called by God to do something, is that always what we should be doing?
So the vocations process in the Church of England in particular sort of pushes us onto train tracks that put us in a mindset that say calling is immutable, that you are called to be a priest and you are called to a place, and that might eventually change, but ultimately you are called to go somewhere to do something. And in some respects this is helpful, and it's true, because God is calling us so that we may, utilise our gifts in service of God, in service of the community, in service of the church. However, at the same time, it can be incredibly demoralising if you kind of are under a call, but you start to feel like it's not working, or like you're in the wrong place, particularly if that change comes a lot sooner than you're expecting it to. I think most people, if you're called to parish ministry, you might expect to be in a place for 8 years or more, and yet it's quite common actually to find this isn't working out and I need to move on sooner than this. Or I think we all know people who they're just having troubles with the Church of England and they're struggling to find a suitable position, and then they're struggling with the idea of, well, I might have to be looking for employment outside of the Church of England. So am I denying my call? Am I betraying my call? Which is really unhelpful, because God calls us as we are. And sometimes, that means the best way that we can serve God and serve the community might not be in the box that the Church of England has put us in.
I was chatting to a friend just last night. Shout out to April, who sometimes listens in.
Hi, April.
We were ordained together. And our ministry kind of has weirdly followed one another. We were both in Oxfordshire, then we were both vicars in Reading, and she is retiring to Salisbury in the next couple of weeks. So
is she a friend or a stalker?
Well, I stalked her to Reading, and then she's stalking me here now, so we're taking it in turns.
It's a mutual stalking, that's fine.
But she attended a session about what it means to be a retired priest in her diocese, and she kind of found the whole language quite dispiriting, because it was kind of this whole idea of, well, you move to a place and you visit a church, and then you work out in conversation with the vicar of a church you think you can settle into what you're willing to do to help out, kind of thing. Helping to cover services when the vicar's away and things like that. And she found it utterly dispiriting and unimaginative that to some extent all that she might be good for is helping to cover. And that's not to say that she wants to do her own thing, but actually, surely there are other ways of thinking about what one's priesthood might look like in this new context, rather than propping up a system that doesn't seem to be necessarily working for anybody. That's a bigger conversation. But one of the things that came out of that conversation for me was that idea that our callings can shift and change their expression. So, as you've touched on it, Cate, there are people for whom their priesthood is best expressed outside of, say, being a vicar, and that might look like chaplaincy. Or it might look like working in the secular world, either in the charity sector or community organisation or whatever.
Working in Tesco, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really struggled to when it was coming up for me finishing my curacy and applying for my first position of responsibility. I really struggled to find something, partly because it was during COVID, and so it was just impossible to go and see anywhere, but also because at that particular point in time, and I think still, the types of positions that were being advertised and the sort of things that people weren't really looking for, kind of fresh curates becoming vicars. They wanted people who were tried and tested. So I really struggled to find something, but the most liberating thing I felt and I experienced during almost a year of continual rejection and questioning my call and saying, have I gotten it all wrong? Or like, does the church just not want me? Like, have I put all this time and energy into this since I was 17, certain of my track, certain of where I was heading to be wrong? The most liberating thing was not people saying, oh no, just wait, because God's got the right thing in store for you, just keep going. The most liberating thing was saying, you know what, it's not the end of the world if I have to move in with family and work in a bookshop while I, either continue applying to parishes or re-explore what my priesthood looks like. Yeah. And that, for me, that's incredibly liberating. Partly because I worked in a bookshop as a teenager, so it's not making up something I've never done before. But just getting myself out of the box that said you have to be exactly like this to express your calling. Yeah.
I remember years ago, the now Archbishop of York, speaking about vocation and priesthood.
Hold on, are we name dropping again? Last episode was a very name dropping episode.
It was at a conference thing that I happened to be at.
Not you just hanging out with your best mate, yeah?
No, not this time. He was talking about the fact that if the Church of England ran out of money or couldn't afford whatever to keep him on or whatever, that wouldn't stop him from being the bishop or the priest of the parish. He would work in a barber shop, or he'd go back to whatever it was, and that would be his income. But that wouldn't stop him from being a priest in the area, and we may need to look at that kind of thing, depending on how the Church of England continues to be managed over the next couple of years. I do want to touch as well on the fact that there are priests who, well, some may just leave the Church of England, but others, I do know others who have renounced their priesthood sort of orders, and that they tend to come from people whose lifestyle choices are not straight enough for the Church of England.
Nice wording.
And that's heartbreaking, that people feel like people are made to make a choice between the people
two different
that they
identities
love, and the church that is their spiritual home.
Yeah.
And actually, it's scandalous that such a choice is forced upon people.
Mm-hmm. Or there's clergy who they just have been so worn down by the job that they just can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Because and when we just talked about how, there may become a time where actually we can't afford parish clergy, so all clergy will have to be self-supporting and will work in barber shops and bookshops. But if that happens, the whole job has to be completely reimagined. Because I must admit, I did some maths when I was thinking about, what if I can't find a parish? And I worked out that particularly with my persistent fatigue, I could not work a full-time job in order to be able to afford rent and to kind of lifestyle support, utilities, all of that, and also put in the hours that even self-supporting part-time roles were expecting as being advertised in the Church Times, for example. There needs to be a radical reimagining of what is priesthood in the community if you are not full-time to that. And of course there are self-supporting clergy who are doing that, and that's incredible. A lot of them have already been established in careers.
And this is, we're kind of talking about the big calling stuff here of priesthood and things like that, but there's like little not to diminish them, but like littler callings, the kind of, am I called to a place to do something? Am I called to start a particular ministry? And what if it all goes wrong and it fails? Did I misinterpret my calling? Or did, or have I just done it wrong? And I think it's Sister Bernadette in this has a line about she was called to the right place but the wrong thing. So it was important for her to be in Poplar, which is where they are, but actually that was the location she needed to be in, but that didn't necessarily mean that she was called to always be a nun.
Yeah, I've got like a similar-ish story
for
that. So when I was applying to university, so during my A-levels, knowing I was going to be doing a gap year, the school that I was in put me in gifted and talented and were pushing me to apply to Oxbridge, of course.
Yeah.
Northern Comprehensive School. They took those of us who were likely and really pushed us to go to Oxford or Cambridge. I felt, when we went on the trip to Oxford, I felt adamant, certain that God was calling me to apply to Christ Church, Oxford.
Oh, really?
Completely. I was like, yeah, God, you want me to apply here. This is where you no other college in Oxford, this is the one you want me to apply to. I applied, and I also applied to other universities, of course. And what I got was actually quite a snobby letter telling me that I wasn't intellectually mature enough and to reapply after my gap year. At the same time, I received a fantastic offer from Sheffield University that just kind of stole my heart. But literally within minutes of me getting my A-level results, I got the offer from Sheffield. It was super, super quick through. They made me feel super wanted.
Yeah.
And at that moment, aside from the crushing sense of, I felt that God was calling me to go to Christ Church, Oxford, and I've been rejected. Or not rejected, been told that I'm not intellectually mature enough. It's not like I've hung on to that for over 10 years as a dismissal.
You sound like you've really got over it, Kate.
Yeah. But actually, I went to exactly the right place. If I hadn't gone to Sheffield, I wouldn't have progressed in discerning my wider calling in the same way. I wouldn't have had some really interesting and weird academic opportunities to write essays about things I would never have been allowed to write about at Oxford. Things like the how conversations are coded in Red Dwarf was one of the essays I wrote about. I've mentioned it before, about Pride and Prejudice and zombies, and how there is a manifestation of repressed sexual desire, and like really stupid essays. But I had so much fun, and I also did modules on the cutting edge of English, and I started going down the applied linguistics and teaching English to speakers of other languages route. I got involved with a chaplaincy there and a church that was really keen at helping me explore my calling. If I hadn't gone to Sheffield, where I felt so at home and so confident to kind of step out into myself and into my calling, I wouldn't be here in this job. If I'd gone to Oxbridge, I might have still ended up ordained, but I would have gone down a seriously stuffy academic route, and I probably would have had a mental breakdown.
And hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? That you can look back and go, but actually at the moment and in the time, the pain and the anguish of, feeling like, I was certain this was the right thing for me to do, and I'm being told different otherwise. That's really tricky.
I know a couple of people who have explored vocation to being a nun or a monk, a brother. Was it religious orders?
Yeah, religious orders.
Religious orders. What's interesting is when I was a curate, there was a young woman about my age, our age, who was looking at becoming a sister. And it was interesting just to sort of see how that worked for her. She would go and visit different communities, and she would spend some time with them. And it was very much this sense of, do I feel called to be a part of this community? And then I don't know where she is now, actually. I need to look that up. But she did end up working in the charity sector, and that felt like her calling for that time. But being part of a church community that took the prayer rhythms and the study of scripture really seriously. So actually just the process of exploring the vocation was something that was really enlightening for her. And similarly, my brother friend who explored vocation in our early 20s, you might know him as well, Ruthie. He's a brother at Murfield.
Oh yes, I think I do.
But he's getting ordained as a priest at some point soon, so that's a dual vocation of being a member of a religious order, but also finding that call to priesthood within that context. And it'll be interesting to see where that takes him. But that is a move that a number of people do. Also, on the religious orders thing, I know a couple of people who have felt a calling to the religious life, but then have met somebody, have married them, and that calling has become a calling to priestly ministry.
I think everyone has a story of a monk and a nun who met each other and fell in love, or similar things going on.
When we lived in Carlisle Cathedral Close, one of the other canons at the cathedral, he was a man who had previously been a monk, and his wife had previously been a nun. And as a young teenager, I loved his story. I was obsessed with it. We trained with someone at Cranmer Hall who had previously been in a religious order. Amina Mums.
A few people.
Amina, if you happen to be listening to this. Also our really good friend Thomas had spent time with the Franciscans sort of before and during discerning his calls for priesthood, and is now a third order Franciscan as well as a priest. And it is possible to be part of a religious order in a more contemporary way, maybe, or a more informal way. So there's also those people who are part of the Northumbria community, which is very much not monks and nuns, but they still have a shared rule of life, and that they are a dispersed community, but they sort of share prayer and that way of life as well.
Did either of you ever think about becoming a nun?
I think that when you are a young woman discerning a call to vocation, most of the young women who were in the same boat as me at that point in time all seem to have had at least a brief flirt with the idea of entering the convent before deciding that actually, or we also felt we didn't necessarily feel like we were called away from having families or the possibility of falling in love. I know that when I was 18, I thought, if there was an opportunity of taking religious orders for a set period of time, like the length of time of a university degree, that's something I would want to do. That sounds like really like I don't have the ability to commit to anything. But it's not that. It's that
No.
I would want to be able to give myself to that life and that rhythm of life, but also recognising that I hadn't finished maturing or growing up, and there was also something in me that knew, as much as I was fighting against it at that time, I was heading for parish.
Yeah.
What about you, Ruthie?
Absolutely not.
Ah!
Can you imagine me in an order with greater silence? I would be
I'm
nun.
such an introvert. Like, the idea of being able to curl up, like, in silence, but I was like, oh, it's quite nice.
I wonder whether, I mean, there are all these great stories of female saints who kind of reject getting married and become nuns. And I wonder whether there is something about the fact that because nowadays women do have greater independence and autonomy, that actually their vocation to be a teacher can be realised, or to be a midwife can be fully realised outside of the convent, with no expectations of, well, you've got to be married to a man. Actually, for women to be independent once upon a time, that might look like, well, I'd better join the convent. Well, and that kind of radical act of, we are sisters doing it for ourselves, quite literally.
Although, actually, you were unlikely to be married and a midwife. I'm sure it's one of the storylines in Call the Midwife where actually it was more common that you would do that job until you got married and then you would stop because you'd be looking after your family.
Right.
Or, we can actually be vicars now, or lay readers, or whatever. We can.
But there is that thing about autonomy, isn't there? That you've got the classic stories of the saints, and they're running away from expectations and matches they don't want to be involved in. It's like
and the patriarchy,
man or bear.
Yeah,
and the convent is hanging out with the bear in the wood. Yeah,
Can we just explain man or bear for anyone who hasn't caught on to that internet meme?
So the idea of, would you rather be lost in the woods with a strange man or a bear has been taking the internet by storm, because lots of women have gone the bear, obviously, and lots of men with fragile egos have gone what, why? And the general premise is, a bear, if you leave it alone, will keep itself to itself, It's got other food sources. You just, don't poke the bear with a stick and everything will be fine. Whereas with a man, that's not always necessarily going to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man or bear.
Man or bear. I mean, a lot of our kind of medieval female saints, the story begins with them either avoiding a marriage or their families have died and they can finally dedicate their lives to God. That seems to be the hagiography model. Hagiography is a fancy word for the life of a saint.
There you go.
One of the things that came up in this episode was the fact that Shelagh chose her nun name, which was is Sister Bernadette. I don't think I know anything about Sister Bernadette.
about Saint Bernadette.
Yeah, sorry, about Saint Bernadette.
I did the research because they sort of mention a movie that had come out in the 40s, which is called Bernadette or something along those lines, and it's about Saint Bernadette Subaru. Not Subaru.
Did she drive a Subaru?
She founded an industry of cars.
She was a lesbian.
Subaru. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the International Phonetic Alphabet, and I haven't done that in a while. But anyway, her name is Bernadette. She was from the 1800s. You would know her more as Bernadette of Lourdes. So she, as a young teenager, as a 14-year-old, had experienced apparitions of a young lady in a nearby cave grotto who requested a chapel to be built there, and sort of came to describe and realise this young lady as being the Blessed Virgin Mary. And this became confirmed by the Catholic Church, by the Pope, and now Lourdes is a huge site of pilgrimage. Now people go there. So Bernadette, a young woman who had 18 visions of Our Lady, and then sadly passed away still quite young, aged 35.
The other thing I wanted to talk about from this episode was Chummy, because Chummy's lovely. And so there's this community of these midwives who they all live at the Nonata's house at the nunnery. But they are not nuns, so they go out and party and have baby shams and stuff like that. And Chummy is a midwife who's been there, and she's found a fella and got married as part of this as well. And she's heavily pregnant, and she's supporting someone else who's pregnant, and the baby gets born. And it becomes clear that in this lady giving birth that Chummy's in labour too. And so all the midwives, all the girls, they get really excited, and they talk about the fact that they've got to give their friend an enema, which they're really grossed out about, but they're worried that one of the more harsher sisters will come and do it if the girls don't do it. And so they start the process of preparing their friend for birth. And it becomes very clear early on in the labour process that at the point that Chummy thinks her waters have broken, actually she's had a massive bleed, and that they think that there's an issue with the placenta and things have gone very, very wrong, and they have to call an ambulance, and she's rushed into surgery and all this kind of stuff. And from what was a really happy, exciting occasion of our friend's about to give birth, this is all wonderful, it goes to them on the verge of tears, calling the ambulance, asking things, and just waiting for news. And there's this really beautiful scene where the sisters and the midwives are all sat together knitting blanket squares, which is a task that they've been given to one of the more senior, as in elderly, nuns who's starting to lose her marbles a little bit, as the phrase goes. And they're all like, oh, just make her do that. Why are we doing this? It's such a stupid thing. And they spend their time in the quiet just knitting and praying and thinking about all of these things that are going on and how they need to, being really helpless and not being able to do anything. And the kind of collective... I want to use the word trauma. It sounds a bit more dramatic than that, but I think it actually is. This trauma that this group go through together of their friend, something that's really wonderful goes really wrong, and how they deal with that. And I wanted to think about that because that's something that we deal with within church as well. We have, really key members of congregations die, and it leaves this hole in a place. And when trauma happens in a community, sometimes it's the church that is there to pick up some of the pieces and be a place for people to be. And so I just wanted us to reflect on that a little bit. And have we had experience of that in our churches? And or even if ourselves haven't, what kind of stories do we know, and why is it an important thing to deal with?
Yeah, so this is actually a very live issue with one of my churches at the moment, as we call it in a professional terminology, live issue. This is very current for one of my churches, and we literally today and tomorrow have funerals, significant community funerals for big community members. Tomorrow particularly is going to be painful because it's for someone who spent over 60 years on a PCC.
Wow,
and
gosh.
who it's just devastating that he's gone. But at the same time, with this same church, another significant church member is currently in the hospice. And last year in that same community, we had a very traumatic death of a young lad in his 20s as well.
Yeah.
So it just feels like this community, like there's constant news for this community about people who have died, people who are sick, or other members of the community who have had really kind of sudden and unexpected things like heart attacks and strokes. So a lot of my preaching over the past few weeks has been about these sort of things. It's like, how are we dealing with grief and how are we dealing with death? What happens when we die? Because this is something we're really thinking about. And particularly yesterday, we had the book of Job as one of our readings. The gospel was the calming of a storm from Mark. And we had various options for the other reading, and I decided to go with Job, which was one of the offers.
Who is Job?
Offerings. And so Job is one of the wisdom books from the Old Testament. It is poetry, wisdom, literature. It is a sort of theological argument presented through poetry and through a sort of mythological story. So we have this character called Job, who is set up to be like one of the most righteous men that God can find on earth. And Satan is looking to tempt someone, and God says, that's the guy, because he's super upright. And then literally just Job loses everything. He loses his livelihood, he loses his family, he loses his home. And then he basically wishes for death. And then his friends come along, and there's a huge extended back and forth of basically trying to wrestle the question of, when bad things happen, is God causing them? Is there a purpose to them? Or is it arbitrary? And the sort of at the climax of the poem, God finally speaks. It's in chapter 38. And God speaks out of a whirlwind, and that's the reading that we had on Sunday. But the reason I really wanted to pick this up, and particularly bring it in with the calming of the storm, is that in the calming of the storm, the disciples are afraid. They're on a boat, there's a storm, they're about to sink, and Jesus is asleep in the stern. And they say to Jesus, "Teacher, do you not care that we are about to drown?" And Jesus gets up and he goes out onto the deck of the ship, and he rebukes the storm and says, "Peace, be still." And then he turns to the disciples and says, "Do you still have that little faith? Do you not trust me?" And the disciples are terrified, not of the storm, but of Jesus. And they say, "Who is this that can control even the elements?" And what I picked out is that it's strange that as God speaks to Job from the storm, and as Jesus quietens the storm, these things shouldn't be comforting. And yet when we encounter this scripture, when we encounter these stories, there is something that stills our souls, that even in the midst of the storm, God is with us. And there's something about God's power in creation that calms us. And again, something that should not be comforting, because when you're in pain, when things are going wrong, someone saying, "It's all going to be all right, don't worry," shouldn't be comforting. There's something in the power of the Creator saying to us, "Peace, be still, all shall be well." There's just something in that power of the accompaniment of Christ, even in our suffering.
There's something that I remember about the Book of Job that we talked about at Theological College in Pastoral Care. And we basically tore apart Job's friends for the way that they treated Job in his suffering, and it becomes a philosophical poem exchange, of ideas. So that's that. But one thing we did commend them for was that when they come to be with him, the first thing they do is they sit with him in silence for 3 days. And you talking about sort of bringing Job up and all those beautiful references to people who find stillness brought me back to the episode you asked us to watch, Ruthie.
Yeah.
Because as they were waiting news, they sit together in silence and they're knitting squares of a blanket, which at the beginning of the episode they resented the blanket. But then it comes full circle.
And they use it to cover their friend. It's lovely.
Yeah. And I can't quite remember what it was that Jenny Worth's narration said about silence, but there was something profound about that silence and the togetherness that they had with each other.
Yeah, it talks about holy silence and just there being that space of holiness where, some are praying, some are just thinking and doing an activity that brings them all together. And I was thinking about that with things that happen in a community, that so often the things we go to do as part of that is space and silence. And, we open church buildings so that people can just come and be quiet and talk if they need to, but also can just sit in the silence and go, WTF, to put it mildly, of what has happened. But also we do activities, don't we? Like we might plant a tree or we might create something together, because there's something about building something together that can build a community back together and encourage them and build people up. I remember in my last job talking to a youth worker who, where she lived, there was a lot of gang violence and a kid was killed by 2 peers and everyone knew all of these kids together. And actually that having that space of dealing with this horrific thing that had happened with teenagers, like young teenagers who had knifed each other, and having that space for silence and for people to just weep and cry and go, what? But also having an event that brought the community together to do something, to say, this is horrible, we need to acknowledge that, but we also want to see change too.
Yeah. And accepting that when something traumatic happens in a community, whether it's someone passing on or some sort of event in someone's life, like as if someone has a stroke, but like nothing's the same again afterwards. Recognising that the circumstances might not change, like you may never return to how things were. However, in coming together, in supporting each other, in spending time with each other and in spending time with God, finding the quiet despite the storm, there is a strength there which holds us firm and helps us move forward. Or holds us secure until the storm quietens down and allows us to then make those steps to change.
Something else going back to the episode called the Midwife episode, and that I imagine is common to many of the episodes. But Jenny Worth discovers something about the possible future of the non-artist house. Yeah. And there's a moment where she is simply watching the nuns at prayer.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about Christian communities that are able to, and other religious communities as well, that are able to, in the face of change and uncertainty, and in the light of pain and trauma, actually that constancy of prayer, that rhythm of drawing close to God, is something that can be a helpful structure and rhythm.
Yeah. I mean, also then kind of bringing things back to Sister Bernadette or Shelagh.
Sheila.
She too is going through a traumatic experience. She is having to process this change of her call or loss of who she thought she was going to be for the rest of her life. And things like getting, she took a suitcase with her when she entered a convent, and she's got it back, and she's now wearing the clothes that she wore into the convent thinking she would never wear them again.
Yeah.
And she's given back the money that she brought with her.
Yeah.
Which she doesn't want to take that back, but she's given it back. And she has spent her time while she's been in convalescence for her illness, thinking and praying and wrestling with this idea of, I think my calling has changed.
Yeah.
I think I was in the right place, but for the wrong thing. And for her, getting through that change with a sense of faith, with a sense of once she's made her decision, suddenly you see the change in her body language, in how she's interacting with others, of how secure she is and how strong she is to say, I've made my decision, I'm going to walk towards it.
Yeah.
Literally she walks for the bus.
Yeah. And
I think that the whole episode is dealing with little bereavements as well as big potential bereavements. So you also have, we've mentioned that the building they're in is up for demolition to make way for a new road, and the main character Jenny is also dealing with she has been in love with a married man, and she's saying goodbye. She's kind of drawing an end to that kind of stage of her life and starting a new romance as well.
That doesn't go well.
Forward. No spoilers, please. I'm money. But there's something of lots of moments where people are letting things go. You've also got the character Fred, who has sort of started the episode that the kind of main story is about, or the initial story is about his daughter who's come to stay with him to have a baby, and has brought the other child who was named after her father-in-law rather than her dad, and her dad had been upset about that the child was called something other than Fred. I think it began with A. I've forgotten already.
Anthony, that's
Anthony. But towards the end of the episode, he says, it doesn't matter what these children are called, because they're my grandchildren. And I love them. And again...
And then Chummy names her son after him.
Yeah, then Chummy names her son Fred. But then it's that letting go of those things which are dear to us is painful.
Yeah.
So painful. If you think that's something that's been core to who you are, a core desire, a core sense of calling, a core sense of your community identity, a relationship which has been really important to you, being faced with the loss of that and the change is incredibly terrifying.
And on the note of core identity, to bring this all together on a slightly jollier note after dealing with all the trauma, a core part of the identity of monks and nuns is that they take on a new name as they go into the order. They say goodbye to the name that they have been known of, and they choose a particular name that's important for them. So, theoretically, we're all off to join an order, and we have to pick a new name. What name would you pick? And traditionally, they're kind of related to saints, aren't they? So I will let you have two names. One can, they can be a saint if you would like, but actually of something significant to you.
Well, my first name it came to me very quickly because I toyed with the idea of taking a name as an extra middle name at confirmation. Never really did properly, but I think the first name would be John. Certainly at time of confirmation, the Gospel of John was my favourite Gospel.
Yeah.
It's still, top 2. I think.
Top 4.
But also, since then, spending time with the Book of Revelation so much. That's, written by St. John the Divine. So that feels good. It's the anniversary of my priesting, and it's the day of it's one of the feasts of John the Baptist today. So that's another John, and also it ties me back into my family because my dad is John, and his dad was John. So yeah,
John. Brother John.
Yeah.
Very nice.
I might also, I could go, I guess there's an element that it would be a bit French. I could also maybe take Luke for the
Jean-Luc?
church that I was vicar at. So I could be Jean-Luc.
Oh. Très bien.
And Luke is, the other top 2 favourite gospel.
What about you, Kate?
So I think I would be Bridget Sophia.
Oh.
Ooh,
Bridget,
that's
because
pretty.
Bridget is my favourite saint, patron saint of Ireland, and partly because one of the stories about her, aside from the fact that she dedicated her life to feeding people and caring for the poor, one of the things that I love about her is, one of the stories is that a bishop was visiting and saw her and was just like, I have to ordain you.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Great.
Sort of in terms of kind of female priesthood, she's one of the inspiration stories for me. At St. Bridget of Kildare. And then Sophia, because in kind of the sort of it's in sort of Gnostic literature, kind of around the Gospels, around the Old Testament. Sophia is a name for wisdom.
Yeah.
Which is also kind of linked to the Holy Spirit in interpretation. So partly wisdom, because I think that's something I would want to aspire to in religious orders. But Holy Spirit, because I was born on Pentecost. So Bridget Sophia, I think would be my sister Bridget Sophia.
Oh, those are nice. Oh no.
Ruthie,
I know.
what were yours,
I was thinking of
Bea?
silly ones, so I better move on from that quite quickly.
Oh, sorry, have we taken this too
Yes,
seriously?
you totally did.
We've been very serious. You go silly. Go silly.
I'll do one sensible and one
dear
silly.
pink wafer.
So I think I've mentioned another pod before about Wilgefortis being an absolute babe, and one of these stories of St Wilgefortis was a Christian woman who did not want to marry a pagan prince that her dad was forcing on her, and so she prayed that to God that he would find her unattractive the next day, and the next morning she woke up and she had a full beard. And I just think that is an excellent saint to think about. But if I was gonna there's a fantastic song by a drag queen called Flamey Grant that's called Esther, Ruth and Rahab, and it's all about the badass women in the Bible and, you know, how we've shunned them and put them to a side. And I think I'm a bit gutted that I have to get rid of the Ruth, because Ruth is one of those, that she is an amazing person. I might pick Deborah, because Deborah just, when people are faffing about, she just sorts it all out. She just sorts it out. And as the lyric says in Flamey Grant's song, Deborah's military mind brought peace for 40 years. And actually, she is a wise and good judge. And it's the women who sort the day out for them. So maybe I'll be Deborah Wilgefortis.
The men were running around headless, and Deborah sorted things out. If we were being a bit more silly, my initial gut instinct was to say Jael. Heck
yeah, Jael.
And Junior. I'd kind of want a combination of Jael Junior or Junior Jael. Kind
I was
of the
yeah.
peg to the ear, but also the female apostle who, like, the patriarchy tried to turn into a man because they just couldn't cope with the fact that Paul was commending a female apostle.
Yeah, I do love Mary Magdalene as well, so maybe I'd have a Magdalene. I don't know.
I like Mary of Bethany.
Yeah.
I'd quite like Mary of Bethany.
Be Mary Martha and just have both of them because they're both great.
Or Mary, like be all the Marys.
All the Marys.
I could take Sebastian and go quite gay with patron saint of the gays,
Patron
as
saint of
we've
the
adopted
gays.
him as.
Oh, good old Sebastian.
So as we draw things to a close, we've dealt with some really heavy topics. We've talked about calling and what we do when calling changes, or maybe kind of what it means to discern calling. We've also talked about trauma and how we navigate through that. And then we sort of finished with some almost quite profound reflection of kind of if we were to rename ourselves according to saints, what that would be. So I wonder, as we draw to a close, with kind of change on the mind, whether that's change of calling, traumatic change, or kind of rebranding ourselves in a faithful way. I wonder what you, dear listener, whether you're facing any change at the moment. And we pray that, whatever's being stirred up in you or around you, that you'll know that God is with you, and all shall be well.
And all manner of things shall be well.
Amen.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Vicars Watch Dibley. Thank you to Nat for editing our ramblings.
Any opinions expressed are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Church of England or any other organisation with which we are affiliated.
If you like our podcast, leave us a review, follow us on social media and share it with your friends. And, as always, bless you for listening.
A priest and a nun. It's a male priest
Okay.
and a nun are on a trip to a faraway monastery, but their car breaks down in the middle of nowhere as a blizzard rages around them.
No.
They find a deserted cabin, convenient, and they take shelter. So there's a sleeping bag, there's a bed, and there's a pile of blankets, and the priest offers the nun the bed, and he takes the sleeping bag for himself. Whilst they're sleeping, the nun calls out, "Father, I'm cold." So the priest gets up and puts another blanket on her. "Is that better, sister?" he asks. "Yes, much better," she replies. 10 minutes later, it happens again. "Father, I'm still cold." So once again, the priest gets up and puts another blanket on her. "Is that better, sister?" he asks. "Oh, yes, that's much better." 10 minutes later, she calls out, Father, I'm still so cold." The priest thinks about this and says, "Sister, we're in the middle of nowhere, in a blizzard. No one but you, myself, and the Lord will ever know what happens here this night. How about, just for this night, we act as though we were married?" The nun thinks about this for a minute, and she can't help but admit to herself that she's been curious, so answers with a tentative, "Okay, just for tonight, we will act as though we are married." "Wonderful," the priest replies. "Now get up and get your own darn blanket, you great lazy lump."
That did not take the turn I was expecting, and I loved it.
That took us on a journey. Well done.